Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to folks listening. My name is Monia Ruiz Velasco. I am the Deputy Director at Equality Illinois, and my pronouns are she, her. I want to thank everyone who's here for being here and folks for listening to this important conversation about LGBTQ and immigration issues. Hopefully, by the end of this conversation, we'll have heard what is really happening with immigration here in the area, as well as what is happening across the country. And we'll also have identified ways for folks to engage and support the folks who are here on the call, the work that they're doing, as well as immigrant communities here in the city, in the state, and across the country. So as we get started, I just want to make sure to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. I want to particularly thank Lee, Mike, and Betty, who are volunteering their time to share their knowledge and experiences with us. And I'm going to let them each introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about where they work, what they do, and yeah, and then we'll get started with some questions. So Lee, why don't we start with you?
Sounds good. Thank you, Moni. My name is Lee Vanderlinden. I am a managing attorney of the LGBTQ Immigrant Rights Initiative at the National Immigrant Justice Center, which is a lot of words to say that I work with queer immigrants at NIJC, which is a nonprofit here in Chicago. A lot of our work has been supporting recent arrivals as well as queer immigrants that have been here for a minute, who are seeking asylum primarily, but also other forms of immigration relief. We do some work nationally, but we really have been pivoting to focus on folks here in the Chicago area. So part of the work I do is just those direct legal services to queer immigrants.
Thanks, Lee. Betty, you want to go next?
Sure, let me unmute myself. So Betty Alzamora, she, her, ella. I am a member of the board of directors of Indivisible Chicago Alliance. We're an all-volunteer core of people across Chicago and West and all the suburbs, really. We work towards advancing progressive policies, electing progressive candidates, holding public officials accountable, and partnering with many organizations that share similar values and goals as we do in advancing progressive policies. We've recently established a working group at Indivisible of people that are working on immigration issues, in particular, trying to establish strategies that are more sustainable over time in partnership with other organizations that are committed to advancing, immigration issues, whether it's at federal level or state level, doing the work as a volunteer organization, helping to lift the work of other organizations that are advocating at a federal level.
Thanks, Betty. Thanks for being here. Mike?
Hi, Mike Jarecki Law Group, pronouns he, him. Similar to Lee, I do direct legal services. So I run a private firm, and our focus is 100% on immigration. So we do business immigration, family immigration, humanitarian issues, some deportation removal defense, and of course, representing the LGBT community. And if a lawyer can have a passion in law, if you'll allow me, it is really working with the LGBT community, because certainly it's a vulnerable population. And even when there was marriage equality, even when there are cases where people want to present their case because they're LGBT and they're facing harm or fear of persecution from their home country, I even have colleagues refer cases to me because they don't want to screw it up and they're worried about the subject matter. Not that they're against it, but they understand the sensitivity that is present in those kind of cases. So I really enjoy giving a voice to those who are working through the immigration system, who are LGBT, and not only in the asylum context, but marriage-based cases, those who meet the love of their life abroad and want to do a fiancé visa, and gay business owners who need to sponsor people for a visa because they need to hire foreign national talent, things like that. Obviously, today we're talking about asylum cases, and my firm represents people in the affirmative asylum context, which means they're applying at a local asylum office, as well as defensively where they're in a more adversarial posture, and an immigration judge is going to decide whether or not they can stay in this country, and a government attorney is actually advocating to try to throw them out of the country. So my role and the role of people who sit in my position in those kind of hearings are to help defend and keep those individuals in the United States as much as possible. Finally, I'm an elected director of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is an almost 17,000 member organization advocating on immigration law and representing our members. And I should mention that I'm also on the leadership board of the National Immigrant Justice Center, which is long to say, but worth saying.
Yeah, and I should say I am too. So I'm Mike and I are both on the leadership board, and and both NIJC, has a long history of the work they really important work that has been happening throughout decades in immigration law. And I know that Mike has also been practicing for a long time, and so we're really grateful for your knowledge and your leadership and sharing your time today. So why don't we start? I know there's a lot of inflammatory news stories about like what is happening and our immigrants coming to Chicago and to Illinois and what is going on. So I wonder if one of you or a couple of you could talk a little bit about just what is happening at the national level. Why are there all these stories kind of bubbling up about, because we've seen even in like the New York Times, they've done like these stories of like, there's going to be so many people coming in. And then 2 weeks later, when things, when they have like actual news to report, they're like, oh, actually, there weren't that many people, or whatever. So just, I don't know if you all could talk a little bit about the national context and what are the kind of trends, what are we seeing now? And then we can focus more locally. So, yeah.
Pick us off. I think one thing that we've been seeing at the national level has been, this administration's restrictions on asylum seekers. One, I kind of can point to the expiration of Title 42 as one turning point. So from the previous administration through to this administration, they used Title 42 as a mechanism to restrict immigration. So ostensibly under a public health guidance, they were restricting entry or using expedited removal or quick deportations to keep the borders closed, and specifically on the southern border. So folks who were coming to seek asylum were being turned away, saying, you can't, flouting our own laws, really saying that folks were not able to seek asylum because of a public health crisis. And of course, COVID was and is a huge public health concern, but Title 42 was inappropriately used to restrict access to our asylum system and immigration system. But then once that ended, then the Biden administration has put new restrictions on folks seeking asylum nationally. And we definitely don't have to go into the specifics of the rule, but just to say that the administration has made it harder for people who are fleeing persecution, so fleeing intense harm. And I work with all LGBTQ asylum seekers. We're talking about people who are fleeing homophobic violence, transphobic violence, and are coming to the United States to try to seek relative safety. Just to be told that, oh, no, you need to register on this phone app. Oh, you don't have a phone? Too bad. Like, oh, your phone doesn't have data? Oh, too bad. And that is being used as a way to restrict immigration. So if folks are able to get through all of those barriers and come to the United States, what we're also seeing are politicians in places like Texas and Florida using people's lives as a stunt, really, or a tool, and are displacing migrants even further by lying to them or at least sending them on buses and planes to other parts of the country, including Chicago. So what we're seeing is additional restrictions on people's movement, as well as national and international political forces really kind of conspiring to harm an already vulnerable and targeted population.
Lee, that's great. I just want to jump in and sort of talk to the people who are like, I get this. It's sort of a humanitarian thing, but I just wish that people would follow the law. I wish that people would just not, sneak in the United States or do something quote unquote illegal. And I just want to sort of dispel how difficult it is to come to the United States. When people say, I'm for people, we need workers, I'm for people coming to the United States, I just wish they'd get a work authorization at a US embassy or consulate before coming, or that they would just go through the proper channels. Our immigration system is so broken that there are not proper channels to allow some people to come into the United States, whether they're students or workers, or in the instance of asylum seekers, people who have literally, some of them fled their home country with nothing but the clothes on their back, no documentation, no money, no proof of some of the harm that they faced in their home country. So when these people are trying to get to the United States, sometimes they did apply for a visa and it was denied. Sometimes they tried to find other routes and those routes just closed to them. So international law allows individuals to claim asylum, and any barrier to that is in violation of international law. So it is in fact a legal permissible activity to present yourself at the border of a country and ask for asylum. And anything short of that is going against the grain of what the United States has agreed to in these international laws, and what other countries and other sort of civilized nations want to see and uphold as ideals. But in practice, we're turning our back on those ideals. And I just want to sort of, mention that because these are legal routes that people are trying to access. But as Lee mentioned, the United States continues to sort of pivot and make it ever more difficult for individuals, some of whom are sophisticated, some of whom are not. Some have smartphones, some do not. And if you're going to say the only way you can come into the United States now is if you can put your information into our app, which sometimes doesn't even work on a smartphone, that's creating a barrier to access that some people may not be able to overcome.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Mike. So, I think one thing, just to highlight from what you were talking about is when people present themselves at the border, they are actually following the path that exists for people. So they're following the right path, right? It's not just like circumventing a law or some sort of thing. I know people are concerned about that. And then the other question is, as you both were talking, is was Title 42 ever applied to the northern border or to our coast? Do you know?
The quick answer, I think, is no. And when we talk about porous borders, the most porous border that we have is the northern border. So there are, unfortunately, Canadians who come into the United States and overstay. There are people from Europe, Western Europe, who come into the United States through Canada and overstay. So the idea that when politicians speak of securing the border, they're speaking only of the southern border. They're not speaking of the northern border, which is unfortunate because that raises concerns of racism and who are the types of people who are south of the border, Spanish speaking, people of color, these types of things. And it's not sort of common to think about people from the north coming into the United States and violating or doing something contrary to the law, but it certainly happens, and it's something that's overlooked.
Right.
I think I would also add to all of everything that you've just said. We typically try to remind people exactly what you said, Mike. There is no line to get into in order to get into the country, and where we are right now is it's not a problem that was caused by the previous administration. This isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a Democratic issue. It's both parties have actually failed in processes all along. So we try to educate people on that as well. The political will has to come from all parties. And that is sometimes a very difficult thing to get across to people. The complexity, the fact that there isn't a line, and the fact that this isn't something that was just started back in January of 2017.
Yeah, thanks. So maybe we can pivot a little bit and just talk about what's going on here in Chicago. I know again, just, for people who are like reading in the news, like in the Tribune or the Sun-Times or whatever, we've read stories of like migrants being sent here from Texas and being at police stations, and not having a place to be. And then like the response that is coming from the state, the city, mutual aid organizations. So I wonder if you all could talk a little bit about like, who are these folks that are being sent to Chicago? Why in Chicago and Illinois? Why are they being sent here? And then what's happening with them once they get here?
I can speak of my experience as somebody who's volunteering in one of the police stations and having sat in on several of the City of Chicago's, the mayor's office briefings that happen every other week. We know that since August of last year, over 11,000 migrants have come in to Chicago, and mostly they've been sent from Texas. So again, to Lee's point about they're coming mostly from the southern border, and to Mike's point about there's the overt themes of racism. So there's that to take into account. I'm looking at some stats that were shared with us on Monday. There's over 5,200 people currently in shelters, and at the police stations, there's just over 800 people that are at police stations, as well as Midway and O'Hare. And we've seen over 32 buses arrive just since June 14th, I think it is. So the city provides some shelter space. And they provide some immediate needs, through the shelter, through food that is being sourced through the Greater Chicago Food Depository and CHI-CARE. And ICER and others are running welcoming centers to provide some basic information that people need. So access to healthcare, access to some legal services and the like. Mutual aid, certainly in District 15, it's a heroic effort. In that particular station, you've got over 100 volunteers that have been grouping together since, I believe, March. And they're basically doing it all on their own. They're accessing resources to the best of the ability. There is no professional, there's nobody there that does this like some of you do it on a professional basis. So it's growing organically. A lot of it is, knowledge that is being gained very rapidly on the ground, boots on ground. And they're tapped into other stations and learning by their experiences as well. But what is clear, I think, to many of us is, the volunteers, they're heroic, they're also exhausted, and the resources are limited. This is all coming from communities, and candidly, the sustainability of the model over the long term is very uncertain. Hence why they are, they've created the channels of communication directly with the city in order to be able to establish more direct access to some of the resources needed, in particular at the police stations, which, by the way, the numbers fluctuate almost on a daily basis. People leave, people come in, and that number is difficult to manage day on day by these volunteers who are basically operating through WhatsApp channels. On any given day for the particular station that I volunteer at in Austin, I could see up to 400 messages. Probably not the most sustainable way to, disseminate information and get things done, but yet they make it happen. It's a testament to what the community members in Chicago are pulling together to do.
Thanks, Betty. And I don't know if either Lee or Mike, you could talk a little bit about like, why are folks being sent here and what is their kind of situation? And I'm sure every situation is different, obviously, but generally kind of what are the patterns, or, why are they here? What is their process?
Would you like me to go? I can go. So basically, if somebody crosses the border and they're allowed to enter the United States because of a provision under the law, which there are many, they're then within the United States and they might have a court date, or they might have to check in with the immigration police called Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So they're in the system and there is a process which they will have to follow. But because many people are coming here knowing someone or knowing someone from their community, they're likely to travel to those communities. But some people will remain in the border area until they can figure out what their next move is. What unfortunately has happened, especially in Texas and Florida, are those Republican governors have decided to weaponize individuals in an inhumane way and ship them to other places unannounced, not in coordination with the other governments of the places where they're sending them to, simply for a media stunt to say, if you don't think there's a migrant problem, if you don't think there's an immigration problem, we're going to try to show you that there is one. And while this is stressing resources and while this is creating chaos because it is unannounced, it is not showing that there's a migrant problem, and it is not saying or showing that people are turning their backs on migrants. They're seeing through this political stunt. And unfortunately, the governor of Florida has received upwards of $10 million, and I think possibly double that through other appropriations, specifically for the transportation of migrants to other places. So literally the legislature of that state is using tax dollars of the citizens of Florida to ship people to other places simply to try to make their lives worse for his own political gain. So that's what's happening. And then Betty already spoke about what's happening on the back end. People are scrambling with resources to basically, I don't say this sort of to make light of it, but it's whack-a-mole, right? You see the issue there, you have to run to it. You see the issue there, you have to run to it. So there are welcoming facilities here in Chicago where if there was coordination, they could say, let the bus go to X location where there might be people to process individuals, give them clothes, give them food, all those things. But no, they're dropping them off in a park. They're dropping them off in the dark of night, specifically to create chaos and to make it look like nobody wants these migrants. Nobody wants to deal with this. And nobody's saying that the migrant situation on the border with other non-for-profits or other communities, that they're not stressed with some of the amounts of individuals who are there, but there's a different approach that could happen, which is let's pool resources. Chicago, you can help resources to the southern border. California, you can do that. Martha's Vineyard, you can do that. There's no good faith coordination happening. And it's really sad because the people who are suffering are the individual migrants, many of whom have young children. So when we're thinking about these issues, we want people to think in an empathetic way and put yourself in the shoes of these individuals. If you were just bussed around to different places and pushed around to different places, when you've already gone through all these other traumatic experiences just to get to the United States, trying to have some semblance of safety.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to adding to the chaos on the legal side of things. Like Mike was saying, when folks are put into the deportation system in immigration court, the government, the ICE can kind of make up fake court dates. And the only way that someone can have their real court date informed to them, which is what the government's required to do, is if the court has their current address. And if it is truly chaotic trying to facilitate changes of addresses to where someone can actually be. There are ways for folks to look up their court date on their own, but that's not always reliable or accurate. Even when you go to the website, the ACIS website, the pop-up right away says, you can't rely on this information. So what we're seeing is just what I would call an intentional side effect of these busings is causing some people's deportation orders, because even if it's something that's called a master calendar hearing, which is like a status hearing, usually not very long at all, a matter of minutes, if you don't know about that hearing and if you don't go to it, you're ordered deported. And not like criminal law, in immigration, you are not guaranteed a lawyer. So if you miss your court date and you're ordered deported, there are some ways to fight that later on, but really this is a problem of our own creation and further drives this community into insecurity.
Great point. And I think the busing compounds that, because with immigration law, when you're scheduled for a hearing in a specific court in the jurisdiction where you've arrived or where they thought you were going to go, you're stuck in that court until you can do a change of venue, which is not guaranteed. And the judge of that jurisdiction gets to decide if they're going to change your court to the place that you desire it to be changed to or not. So if somebody had a court date in Florida and they're bused to Chicago, they're still required on their particular date to appear in person at that court at their own expense without an attorney, or an attorney of which they retain of their own expense. So all of these types of things are built in to take advantage of individuals who don't know the system. And let me tell you, the system is not forgiving at all. So a judge is unlikely to say, well, you know, you were bused somewhere, you missed your court date. Did you know you had your court date? Did you send us a letter to explain something? It was after the fact of the court date. I'm sorry. So it's extremely unforgiving, and it's difficult for lawyers to navigate, I'll tell you. I don't understand how individuals who aren't lawyers and who aren't even understanding the processes, you know, culturally and procedurally of the United States could navigate it.
And that change of venue has to be in English.
Yeah, so just kind of top line is people may be given a court date, or they may be given a fake court date, or they may be given an appointment with immigration. And I know people aren't always clear about what kind of appointment they may or may not have. And then they are required to show up. Like you said, if they don't show up, they could be ordered deported if it's in court. If they want to ask the court to change their court to another location, it has to be in English, and they have to know what they're doing and how they're doing. So basically making it impossible for people to actually show up and claim, you know, file their applications or whatever. And so how are, and this may be more for Betty, but also for the two of you, since you're both also engaged in this, is like, how are government agencies responding? How is the city responding? How is the state responding? Like, is there a number people can call to find out like where to go or how to access services, or how do people know what to do?
I think that is one of the great needs right now, Moni, is centralizing all of the immediate information that is required. In particular, legal services, to your point, is probably the most distressing part, because most of the people that I've met at the stations have missed their court dates, or have missed a biometrics appointment, or whatever, you know, they've not been able to ascertain where they are in the pipeline, so to speak. And there isn't, to the best of my knowledge right now, like a centralized place that actually disseminates that kind of information. Much of it is being, certainly in the case of District 15, you know, it's volunteer lawyers that are coming up and doing pop-up clinics. I will also speak to your point. There are community nonprofits that are also stepping up. Certainly in the Austin area, we have a couple. Family Focus has just done brilliant work in case management and providing legal services and being able to channel people to try to get some sort of relief in that way. Build has done similar work as well, but the need for lawyers to be able to meet, you know, the volume is still high. And of course, they're stretched across the entire city, not just one station. There's 25. And that's before we even speak about what's happening at the shelters, which, you know, arguably is probably more structured because they are city-run shelters, and the welcoming centers are there to support them. ICER, I believe, has also stepped into to help fill some of the void, to try to direct people, in particular for the legal services component. But in answer to your question, I you can shoot me later if I'm found out wrong. I just don't think there is one centralized place. I do believe that the mayor's office, with the recent appointment of the deputy mayor for immigration, migrant, and refugee rights, I mean, this is a priority for them. They know that that it's not like they're sitting around doing nothing. They are trying to run parallel work streams around food, shelter, employment, and access to healthcare and legal services. If there was one ask I would have is, how do you find a way to centralize some of these things that are just key flashpoints? Missing a court date really will change your life. And how are you able, to centralize the access to that information in ways that are low technology or even no technology? So printouts then get lost or out of date very quickly. I've read about models in New York City where volunteer corps are creating access via websites. I think Restoration Project is also doing something similar, but it's hard because I think back to what Lee and Mike have been describing, the system is so darn convoluted. It's not like there's, here's a one pager of what you have to do.
And what about, Betty, sorry to interrupt, for not for legal, but for all the other needs, right? For clothes, I mean, right now it's summer, but we'll have winter around the corner.
Yeah, so this is all coming from community member donations, whether it's financial contributions to GoFundMe sites, as is the case at District 15, or whether it's something that has been organized across all the volunteer teams, the Open Collective site, where monies can be deposited, as donations, or whether it's community members coming up with clothes, food donations, and the like. At District 15, we're organizing food. We have a meal train that is organized. We're working now with faith-based congregations and the like, who are signing up in droves to be able to provide, breakfast here, lunch there. The city is funding Chai Cares to provide dinners at all the stations, so that meal has been covered. But it's the volunteer corps that is then, tasked with providing that, the immediate need of blanket, shelter. There are people that provide phones, and they organize, that something that they're doing organically. There are people there, at our station, we've got one person who's responsible for creating what we call welcome packs, which are basically a suitcase with a couple of blankets, underwear, basic hygiene materials. And so when we hear that there's people being bussed into the station, somebody's ready with a suitcase to be able to take to the station to give to the individuals. And to Mike's point, it's the kids. There are a lot of children as well. So, so meeting those needs it's hard.
Yeah. And so you've talked a lot about how communities are responding. They're getting organized and doing, supporting and all of that. How are communities across the city or across the state, responding? I know Indivisible has done some work to try to encourage people to be supportive. Obviously, generally, I think people are very supportive, which is why there's all these systems growing in place. But can you talk a little bit about that, Betty? Just what Indivisible has done to do some kind of political education around this and engagement?
So there's, we identified early on in one of our first sessions as a working group that running a mutual aid network is not in our area of expertise. So we will support and disseminate the information. We've got that, we've got links for volunteer donations and how to get involved on the indivisiblechicago.com website. On the homepage, you'll see a page called Sanctuary, and it has all of those links there, Moni, for people who want to get immediately involved and engaged and plugged into the police station. So that's one area of organization. We'll lift the voices of the mutual aid network. At a longer term and a more strategic level, it's about being able to identify where can we move the needle more effectively to advocate both for federal or state change. I think one of the areas that there's two things that we're looking at. One is focusing on what can be done with expediting employment authorizations. And so Indivisible itself can't do it, but there are elected officials that have advocated for that as part of the Illinois congressional delegation. So what can we do to organize around that and lift the voices of their requests? Can there be administrative fixes that the administration at a federal level can do to be able to grant parole and expedite work permits? I think what you hear the most from the migrants once you've met these most immediate needs of shelter and food is, I want work, I need to find some way to start earning, to be self-supportive, in many ways to regain self-esteem as they establish themselves in the country. And so that's one of the areas that we want to focus on. As we lean into the electoral cycle of 2024, the other area that we can and should be focusing on is how do we educate people to change the narrative around what immigration is? So, to counter some of the false myths that Mike had alluded to, that, hey, get in line and it's easy to get in. And, oh, criminals, that's what immigrants are, and they're really a drain on the system. Be able to change the narrative and start educating people in advance of the general elections next year, such that we can actually get people to put the pressure on elected officials to advocate for some of these changes at federal level. We've got some of the delegation that have signed on to some of these changes, not all of the congressional delegation, so that's one area that we can focus on. At a state level, there may be things that we can do, even though employment authorizations are, as you all know, at federal level, there are things that potentially could be done at a state level. And we're only just now starting to explore, things that have happened. For instance, it was mentioned to us on Monday about a 1986 law in California that allows the Board of Regents of the University of California system to employ immigrants in a lawful manner. I don't know enough about it. You're the lawyers in the room and you'd be the folks that I'd be consulting with, but isn't that an intriguing possibility where the state could actually provide employment for migrants through some loophole law that already existed and is enshrined in California? I don't know if that's possible in Illinois, but it's certainly worth exploring the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Betty.
I feel that invitation, I think. Well, I know nothing about the Board of Regents in California. Something that I do know that does surprise folks is that you're not authorized to work once you arrive. For many to most of these folks who are seeking asylum, what the law currently says is that after you apply for asylum, you have to wait 150 days before you apply for work authorization. So we're talking about the application for asylum isn't just, oh, just sign this piece of paper. It takes hours to prepare a competent, with a lawyer's help, it takes hours to prepare a competent asylum application. And then you wait for months until you can apply for work authorization. So it's this idea of, oh, just do it the right way, just wait your turn. Right now, the waiting your turn is saying you don't have this right to work, you don't have these access to the formal labor market for months and months. And I think I also just wanted to highlight the complexity of this system, in that just applying for asylum itself is not a short-term prospect at all. In my work, I started at NHAC in 2017. I am working on asylum cases that we started in 2017. The backlog in immigration court, and also how Mike was saying affirmatively with local agencies, is extreme. So when lawyers are helping folks start to navigate this process, taking these cases, it's years and years of work that that asylum seekers have to suffer through before even they'll get an answer on their cases.
Yeah, thank you.
It's,
Yeah.
it's something like 50 to 75 hours, I believe, Mike, that I read in a recent Baylor report about asylum. That's how long a case can actually take to prepare by a lawyer.
I can look that up, but yes, it's very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let me give some context as to what that is. There's about a 10-page form that asks, you know, information about the individual, you know, where they've gone to school, where they've lived, their family members, and why they're claiming asylum with as much detail as possible, and how they arrived to the United States. So there's all of this information, but that's just the form. To have a successful asylum application, you know, through the end of an adjudication, you have to put a detailed affidavit together that's telling your whole entire story of the trauma that you faced in your home country, the fear that you have, the harm that that occurred to you, who that was from. So you're preparing that with an attorney, potentially with the help of a counselor, because, you know, attorneys are good at law and we have to sort of stay in our lane. And then these cases take a lot of other professionals to help the case along. And then once you finally get that story from the applicant and then you move forward, you're in this holding pattern for years and years and years. And what does that person want to do most? Tell their story. Tell their story and close the door and close the chapter on that part of their life, and they cannot. It's constantly hanging over their head for years upon years upon years. And then they have to tell and re-traumatize themselves their story finally when the government gets around to them 6 years later, 7 years later. If it's in the asylum office, it's more of a conversation, but they can still find themselves into immigration court. And as I mentioned, immigration court is very adversarial. It's very much what you see on TV. The individual has to take the stand, has to be asked questions by their lawyer and responds, then has to be asked questions by the government lawyer and has to respond. So none of this is easy.
Yeah.
So it's just a little bit of context of what goes into that.
Yeah, and oftentimes you need an expert, right, to go along to support the claims that you're making. You need like proof of things that have happened. So I know, you know, just from in the past working on these cases, I think 50 hours is like at a minimum, but I know there are cases that would take, you know, over 100 hours to work on a single case, especially if you add up all the years that you're working with someone. So just to kind of wrap things up, I just, you know, this is something new that we're exploring and really wanting to make sure that folks that are engaged with us, and we have, you know, over 40,000 people are going to get this recording across the state. So we want to make sure they understand why immigrant justice is LGBT justice. And I wonder if you all can talk about that from your own perspectives. Is, you know, why is it important for people in the LGBTQ community, as well as our allies, to really care about this, to engage on this issue, and then to also be aware of this issue when we go to vote and when we are holding our elected officials accountable? So I'm going to start with Mike and then go backwards from there, since I've started the other way around.
Thank you. It's 100% an LGBT issue, and the reason is this: so much of immigration requires someone else to do something for you. If you're a family-based, if you're doing family-based sponsorship, marriage to a U.S. citizen, somebody can sponsor you. A parent can sponsor you. A sibling can sponsor you. If it's employment-based, you need an employer to sponsor you, unless you're extraordinary ability and something sort of unique. With asylum, you can do it on your own. But I really think that maintaining the integrity of asylum and making sure that the US is a welcoming place for individuals who are facing harm and persecution in their home country is so vitally important to the LGBT community, because asylum honors the individual. Asylum honors the human being that people are. And the US government is literally saying, we are going to give you protection and refuge in this country because somebody else is seeking to harm you for a reason that we think is offensive. And I think that's very powerful with all the other sort of political rhetoric that's going on. The fact that the US government has taken a stand and we haven't retracted from that is so important, because what's happening in Saudi Arabia, for being gay, for being lesbian, for being bisexual, for being transgender, you could be hung in a public square where people are cheering your death. In Nigeria, the same. Uganda, the same. Russia, the same. There are many, many, many places around the world. And this is sort of where, for me personally, empathy matters. Having a sense of the luck. I don't want to use privilege because I feel like that's a very loaded word, but the luck, but for the fact of being born in the United States, but for the fact of being born in a family that welcomes and celebrates who I am, I would be facing these same things. And individuals who come to the United States, it's not perfect, but we have a system that will seek to protect them and give them a chance to live in a stable, in a healthy, and in a protective environment by giving them that lifeline, which is immigration. So I really think those who can get involved and who could support even one person in processing through this, maybe not as the attorney, but maybe financially, maybe not financially, but as an interpreter, somebody who wants to help in any way, shape, or form could help us, meet the goals and meet the needs that are out there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Betty, I'm going to pass it to you next.
Yeah, I'm reminded of those the words of, I think it's Maya Angelou. The truth is that not one single one of us can be free until everybody's free. So why this matters. Everything is intersectional, right? This isn't just about migrants and one separate identity. LGBTQ, there's already a whole swath of discrimination, hate, and phobia associated with that identity, whichever part of the spectrum you may lie on. So fundamentally for me, what this is, it's an issue of freedom. And it becomes, it boils down to just having simply the right, the essential human right that we all have to live our lives in the most authentic way that we want. Irrespective of who we are, irrespective of our sexual orientation, gender identity, our ancestry, our race, socioeconomic status, our faith traditions. It's the right to bodily autonomy. It's the right to freedom of movement. All of these things that are just basic, universal, fundamental human rights. And to Mike's point, I plus 78,000 on the issue of empathy and compassion. The incredible opportunity that Chicago has right now as these migrants have come through is the overwhelming response of community members. These community members have now achieved proximity to the issue. As Indivisible furthers thoughts about, what campaigns can we lift, what organizations, whose work can we actually educate ourselves on and partner with and support, it becomes a question of this incredible force of volunteers that are now proximate to the issue of immigration and can get involved in mobilization, in organizing, in advocacy, in protest, in support of immigration rights and LGBTQ justice, which are intersectional. That to me matters on so many levels. It's what moves me, it's my passion. And I feel like it's the passion of many people that are becoming far, very, very close to the issue and very educated as they meet, to Mike's point, all it takes is to meet one person and hear their story, walk a mile in their shoes, understand that they're but for the grace of whatever being infinitely you believe in, that could have been you and yours walking in those shoes too.
Thank you, Betty. Lee?
Yeah, to the point of why is immigration an LGBTQ issue? Because there's LGBTQ immigrants, and there are immigrants who are LGBTQ. These are shared communities. And if nothing else, kind of speaking to both Mike and Betty, these are shared human values. To put on like a little bit of a nerd cap for a moment, like Mike alluded to, immigration asylum law is one particular place where someone's identity can be used as a hook to seek protection. So part of asylum law basically is that you have to show that you were harmed in your home country because of a protected ground. And right now, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected grounds for asylum law. It's not just politics or, political asylum. Asylum law explicitly protects queer people. And so we as a community, as a queer community, can see this opportunity as a place to reach a hand out to some of the most vulnerable amongst us. I think that, through NIJC, things that we're trying to do is increase knowledge within queer community, within immigrant community. Our website has some resources and trainings that you can access to learn more. We're providing some of those resources to other organizations to host, pro se clinics or places where folks who are at shelters, who are at police stations, to be able to get some of that really necessary information. So I think that when we're in queer community and when we're looking for those places to help sometimes even the more marginalized amongst us within even a racial equality lens too, that looking to this moment of extending compassion, empathy, and material support to the immigrant community is now.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. Well, thank you all. I just want to uplift your organizations, and I want to make sure people donate and get involved with NIJC. So your website is immigrantjustice.org, that people donate and volunteer with Indivisible Chicago, and get connected through all the resources that are on their website. And then obviously people can go to our website for additional links at equalityillinois.org. And I want to add just that I want to make a call to action, because I wouldn't be an organizer if I didn't do that at the end. And so people need to volunteer, support, all of you in the work that you're doing, and vote, getting out to vote, getting other people out to vote, and making sure we're voting for candidates who are supporting immigrant communities, who are bold in their visions for all of this. Because I know immigration reform is something that politicians love to talk about, but hasn't happened in over, we're getting close to 50 years now. So we want to make sure that there are favorable, laws at every level of government, from city to the county, to the state, and to the federal government. So thank you all so much for sharing your time and resources. We're going to share this out with all of our community and all of the people that that are in our networks, and and we'll be hopefully continuing our work together to support immigrant justice. So thank you. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you.